Welcome, Jet fans, to the opening of the offseason for the New York Jets. The 2024 season is going to be off to a start here. We already had our exit interviews and we've had our press conferences to close out the seasons. We've heard some words from Robert Saleh and his views of how the season went. The fact that he believes that this team took some strides late in the season, that the offense has improved. Um, then Joe Douglas kind of mimicking that although the season didn't go as planned, obviously with the amount of injuries that they've had, that they think they're a lot closer than maybe it might appear from the outside looking in. Um, so overall, you look at this season, the Jets wrapped it up with a victory over New England, ending a 15-game losing streak against the Patriots in what might be Bill Belichick's last game as head coach for the Patriots. Personally, I understand, what this does to our draft positioning. I think we were projected to pick sixth, and maybe if everything fell right, we could have ended in the top five, best case scenario. Instead, we're picking 10th. Um, Personally, again, I understand the implications of what the fifth pick means versus what the 10th pick means, but when you have a team like this, getting that victory over New England off their plates, I know it's meaningless. I understand all that. Um, but for these players to just go out of the season on a high note in a season that has been just treacherous, just lost from the beginning, 4 plays into the season when Rodgers went down, and the impact of not making any additional moves to improve the quarterback position, to potentially allow for this team that we all believed had definitely playoff caliber potential, and with Rodgers potentially Super Bowl caliber potential, for everything just fall off the rails the way it did, and still somehow end the season with a 7-10 record. Um, you know, I'll take what it is. I mean, we can gripe and complain and bitch and moan pretty much all we want about how the season ended, but at the end of the day, these players are not going to tank. The players don't tank. The players are fighting every single play, every single day, um, for now. The Elias players don't last in this league for as long as players like Tom Brady did. Um, and some players don't even make it to their second contract. So these players are going to fight their tails off, and you know, although fighting their tails off resulted in a 7-10 record, I think we can all kind of look at this team and see that there are some bright spots, and some areas that definitely need to be improved. They're not anywhere near, in my opinion, to a finished product. I think Rogers kind of said that in his press conference um, yesterday as well. There's a lot that needs to be done, and I'm going to take some time here over the next few minutes to kind of, or yeah, for the next few minutes to go over, you know, first off, just going through what I believe the stars of the team were. I know again a 7-10 record don't have many stars, but I think we can kind of look at this team and say, okay, there are some areas that definitely you don't need to address. That there are key players there. So with that being said, I will go ahead and start there with the stars of the team. And for purposes, I'm taking kind of a hockey approach with a little bit of a twist. I'm going to go through my 3 stars on defense, 3 stars on offense, and 3 stars on special teams. Just give these guys a shout out. Starting with obviously on the defense side of the ball, this is where a majority of the stars come from. I'm going to start with Sauce Gardner. Obviously, what he's done this season and even last season to start his career is nothing short of just incredible. He has been everything that we would have expected and more from the guy that we picked fourth overall in last year's draft. Super excited for what he has done in his first couple of seasons, both on and off the field. He exudes positivity. Um, in a season where there was not much to be positive about, you can definitely see that he's a budding star if he's not already. I know he made the Pro Bowl last year as an All Pro, but he's very shortly coming into an even better player. When you look at what he has the potential to do, as great as he has been, his interceptions were down this year. Didn't have any. Last year he had 2. The step that you would see from him potentially moving forward is, you know, one, continue to throw the ball in his direction, to increase his chances at making interceptions. But yes, you do want to see those turnovers increase. Um, there was a couple of plays that he had sure interceptions. I look back at the Dallas game, at the end of the half. Dak threw a ball basically right into his hands. It was a drop. You'd like to see your star players not make those mistakes, but that's basically nitpicking. Very few areas of concern for what I believe is a star in this league. Continuing with defense, my other 2 stars, I'm basically going at all 3 levels here. Quincy Williams, is my star. Again, this is not an order, just going, each group. Quincy Williams is my next star. Um, he's a player going into the season that, I mentioned in an earlier podcast, someone that you really just are proud to have on your team. A player that each and every single year has progressed. Um, it hasn't been huge strides by any means. It's been a slow and developing process, but that slow and developing process has gotten us to a point where, arguably, a top 5 linebacker in this league. I believe he was snubbed out of making the Pro Bowl. The guy is all over the field. His speed is evident. His hard hitting is just loud and roaring when you watch these games. If there's a big hit being made, you turn around the corner, and it's probably him right near the ball. Um, just just super proud of where he is, and even more excited for what his career could eventually turn into. I look at a player like Demario Davis and what he was, former Jet as well. Um, just a player that we drafted. I think he was a third or fourth round pick, if I don't remember correctly. We drafted him. He developed into a good player. I think we traded him, or he left in free agency. I forget what it was. Went to Cleveland, came back for another year, and you can see his improvement. It was there already. And then for whatever reason, after seeing him twice and seeing how much he progressed, we allowed him to walk a second time, and he went to New Orleans, and the rest is history. He's putting on an outstanding career, with New Orleans, been the staple of that defense, in the middle of that defense for years and years and years, and that's kind of what I see Quincy Williams, slowly developing into. Will he be Demario Davis? I'm not sure. Would I like him to reach that level and maybe even exceed that? Would be outstanding. But that's kind of what I look at Quincy Williams, just a player that's just like doing the right things all the time, progressing slowly and surely to the point where, he is where he's at today. So, and then obviously the third star, I don't think we have any really major debates. Quinn Williams is, the best player on his defense. His sack numbers went down this year compared to where they were at last year. Um, wasn't the same player from that aspect. But when you look at the film, you see that this guy's causing mayhem. He's causing issues. He's getting double, triple teamed almost every single snap. When he is one on one, he's winning those battles. He's making plays in the backfield, and he is getting those sacks when that happens. Um, so, a player that's living up to that contract, again, if you're looking at the sack numbers, you're not going to see it. But if you watch the film, you know what you're getting out of Quentin Williams. He's a star. He's awesome, and he's, my third star on the defense. I'll go over to special teams because offense doesn't deserve the right at this point in time, to be the second in the group. So I'll go over to special teams, and I think it's pretty straightforward. Thomas Morstead, I would say, again, I'm not ranking, but Thomas Morstead was an absolute stud, for special teams. The guy, was asked to do a lot considering how much he had to punt, because of how poor this offense played in a season. But when when it was needed, he punted and he got that ball down and inside the 20 a lot. This defense capitalized on that many times, with providing the offense on a short field, or a number of safeties in when they were given the opportunity, had that ball down inside the 5. I don't think we can really argue this team has had issues in the punting game over the years with Braden Mann. Um, so it was a huge sigh of relief when we actually got some stability at that position. He's a player that signed a 1-year contract last year. It's going to be imperative that the Jets bring him back, for 2024. he's just a weapon. And I mean, you talk about it, talk bragging about a punter isn't really the thing that we wanted to do here in January. But when you look back at the season, he really was a star on this team for what he was able to do and what we needed him to do. Next up, you look at Justin Hardy. He's a guy that when he got injured in the middle of the season, you knew he was gone. The coverage on punts was not what it was. There was number of broken plays, breakdowns in punt coverage. It's apparent what he means to his team. Another player who is a free agent this offseason and another priority. The Jets do need to bring this guy back. Um, it's gonna be hard. It's hard to replace good core special team players. That's what Justin Hardy is. So, again, another star. Um, when you look at special teams players, it's hard to identify like what makes a good special teamer, what makes a bad special teamer, unless you're really watching the film, or unless you're seeing what the product looks like when that player is gone. Look at Aaron Rodgers, for example, when he went down. We never really got to see what this offense looked like with him there, but we saw it move pretty efficiently in a preseason game against the Giants. Again, it was preseason, so I'm not really kind of taking that. But when you saw how efficient it was on that drive, even the opening drive against the Bills, like you just saw like big play right out of the gate. Um, when an offense takes that much of a turn, you kind of look at that player. Not comparing Hardy's impact to what Aaron Rodgers' impact could be, but it was definitely apparent that the special teams coverage just wasn't there. And then my third star in special teams goes to Greg Zerline. Again, all three of these guys are going into free agency in this season. All three of these guys should be back. Douglas needs to make these guys priorities, re-sign all of them, and even maybe go into the route of multi-year contracts. Because I mean, I think that when you have stability at these positions, it can't be discounted. We've seen years and years and years of poor kicking, poor punting, and to finally have a season where we felt like, I felt like on kickoffs we were fine. I felt like on punts we knew we were going to get, you know, we were going to flip the field. On field goals, we knew we were probably going to get our 3 points. Um, that hasn't been the case for many years, especially during this, you know, terrible. I would say the last season that we really had true stability at the kicking position is the year we had Folk. Oh, sorry, Myers actually before he left for Seattle was the last season I feel like we really had stability at kicking, and now we have Zerline for this year and last year, and it's been a huge sigh of relief. If we can get that for another year, obviously it takes one thing off the to do list. Then switching over to the offense, I mean, I think we can all kind of basically point out the two main stars, Garrett Wilson, Brees Hall. Garrett Wilson, just you look at what he did last year, catch for 1,100 yards with the poor quarterback play. Mike White came in and kind of helped those stats a little bit. Joe Flacco started the season, helped inflate those stats. There was areas of like in the middle of the season where it just, the stats weren't popping out. But to see him do it again this year with another season of just questionable, below average quarterback play, for him to eclipse that 1,000-yard mark for a second year in a row when not many Jet receivers have done that in the history of this team. It just speaks volumes to what he could be with legitimate quarterback play. I had high expectations of him coming into the season with Rodgers at quarterback, and even with that, I think he exceeded what I thought he would do with this poor quarterback play. It's something that needs to be resolved. Um, and we'll go into my little wish list or team needs list in a few moments here. But Garrett Wilson is an absolute star. What he did this season can't be discounted by any means. Um, really proud of where the direction he's going in. Not even just from an on the field perspective, but to be the guy that stands at the podium and takes accountability every single day for how terrible this offense has been. And let's be honest, it's not him. Um, he's had his issues. He fumbled. I think it was in back-to-back games somewhere in the middle of the season. Has not been the best with catching. had a few issues with drops here and there throughout the year, but I think that has more to do with just the frustration struggles around with everything around him. I think in a season with more stability and you know maybe just a little bit more support around him because the guy was damn near double covered and triple covered on every single play. It seemed like didn't get many opportunities one on one, and when he did, the Jets didn't really pull the trigger as you would expect when you have a star on the outside. So I'm not gonna again, I'm nitpicking here, on just his areas of improvement, but, just making those critical catches, that's what the stars do. He is going to be a star, and I expect those things to be cleaned up when there's a better support around him. Second star, obviously, I think I mentioned him earlier already, Breece Hall. The fact that, when you looked at his stats midway through the season, it looked like it was just a shit show around him. Obviously, his offensive line was terrible, um, but for him to approach 1,000 yards. I think he came out 4 or 5 yards shy or something like that. I think it was 6 yards shy actually. Um, the mathematician on the Jets didn't do math correctly, and I just think that's one that Robert Saleh should have just kept in the back pocket on that one. But they thought he had 1,000 yards. He didn't. But overall, 1,500 yards of all purpose is absolutely outstanding for a guy that it seemed like has been was bottled up for a huge duration of the season, getting tackled behind the line of scrimmage constantly, not many open lanes. They did really work operate that outside zone running a little bit more towards the tail end of the season, it seemed like. So once that stuff started rolling, he really started progressing more as the season went on. And maybe it has something to do with his ACL recovery. Maybe he wasn't there 100% in the middle of the season, but it seems like he really started getting comfortable towards the tail end of the season. So really proud of where he was at, um, and proud of where he's going to go. Again, a lot of pride in what these stars are and the potential of these players. And then you look at the third star, and it was a little difficult kind of to find a third star. You look at you know these other receivers, nobody really stood out. Xavier Gibson maybe had some cool plays. Wouldn't really put him as one of the stars. If anything, probably more on the special team side could have had a chance, but had a few um, issues with handling kicks and fumbles and stuff like that. So issues there. I looked at the offensive line. You know, ABT obviously pops out, but a lot of missed time injuries. Um, he would be the odds-on favorite if he played a full season. So I had to look at somebody who really kind of played the full season and maybe exceeded my expectations of what what I would have expected. And I looked at Tyler Conklin, a pass catching tight end that hit career highs in receiving. So again, this was a hard one to call, but he's a player that has progressed with all the instability around him, exceeded what we would expected. Um, and when you looked at a couple years ago when we brought in Conklin, we brought in Uzama. I think a lot of us had a little more positivity to Uzama because of recency bias and what Cincinnati was able to do. I did like the pass catching ability of Tyler Conklin when he was in Minnesota. He brought that over here, and this year it really kind of took a step up in the right direction. Again, you look at what he had surrounding him, particularly at the quarterback position. Um, you would only expect that those numbers can get better if the Jets bring in, or if the Jets have Aaron Rodgers for a full season, or bring in a reliable backup. So there it has my three defense stars again: Sauce, Quincy, and Quentin Williams on special teams, Morstead, Hardy, and Greg Zerline, and on offense, Brees, Garrett, and Tyler Conklin. Again, a third option could be a number of players, even Tipman, but didn't. I think he played really well this season, but I just gave the edge to Tyler Conklin in that right. So there's our stars, and then you kind of look moving forward. Obviously, it was a terrible season. Um, let's put that out, flush it down. We understand the issues. We see the areas that need to be improved. When you look at the team needs, it's There's a lot of things. It's a laundry list, and the Jets are going to have some major work to get done here in order to get this team to where we really do think it's going to be going into the season. I think a lot of us had those aspirations of playoffs or Super Bowl. This season, if not a major wake up call, really should set some fire alarms in that building that it's not near the finished product that it needs to be. You have a lot of blue chip players, a lot of key players that you can build around. But the things that have been put around those star players is not enough. So I'm going to go through the list here of areas that I think that need to be improved. Obviously, there's some areas for questions. I'll start with the offensive line. You look at this group, and going into next season, Tomlinson's currently under contract. Um, there's some areas for improvement there. Um, and let me actually just first start with our resource that we have available to us in this offseason and where we need to go with that. So the resource that I kind of put together here currently, the Jets have about 16 million in cap space. Now that number gets adjusted a little bit here. So with the draft picks that we have, and we have, I'm going to say about 7 draft picks. Let me look at my list here. Yeah, 7 draft picks. One in the first round, one in the third round, two in the fourth round, one in the sixth round, two in the seventh round. So when you look at players potentially who can help the team now, obviously there are you know, diamonds in the rough that pop out, whether in the sixth, seventh round, and even undrafted that find their way into starting roles. But when you look at just the overall landscape of what the capital looks like, you're looking at the first pick and the third pick as far as players that you can, implement into year one as potential starters or key contributors. And then even the fourth round, you can maybe get lucky with a couple players. We've gotten lucky with guys like Michael Carter, the corner. Um, I mean, it happens. Maybe you get a player in the fourth round you got a higher grade on, fits a role within your team. But when you're in an all-in type of season, I wouldn't really be hoping that this team would be putting all their eggs in a fourth round pick to be a key contributor in many major areas. If it turns out to be that way, fantastic. But the Jets are going to need to look at those first and third round picks as we need to get starters in these two roles. Can't get a guy like Will McDonald and have him sit for an entire year in a season where you were expecting to be in the playoffs or in the Super Bowl, even with the injuries that happened on this team. And fortunately, the one area that we didn't have many injuries was on the defensive line. Didn't get much of a playing time, even towards the end of the season when the season was basically over. A lot of other teams kind of put those younger players into those roles to kind of give them a little more playing time, a little more experience. The Jets didn't do that. So yeah, so $16 million in cap space, yet set aside about 10 to $11 million is going to go towards the 7 draft picks that the Jets have. So in all actuality, the Jets are sitting about $5 million in cap space that they'll be able to use on free agents. Now that number can grow, and I will set up a whole nother episode to kind of go into the little nuances and what salary cap manipulation can happen. But the Jets do have the ability to create up to an additional $50 to $60 million in cap space. Obviously, with that would require to cut some players, trade some players, which you know you cut a player like, one of the players that's an option there, Ozama, you're gonna have to fill that role. Ozama is a player that I think that we can find an upgrade in. So I don't think there's much loss there, but just keeping that perspective. With the Ozama, I think that they can save $5 million in cap space with a move like that. Are you gonna get a replacement with 5 million or less? That's a move that you would want to make. Um, Ideally a little bit less than the $5 million number, but if you're trying to upgrade the position, it's going to cost you some money. So that's something to look at there. So you lose a player, you got to add a player, and ideally you want to add that player for a little bit less, so you have more cap room to use at other positions as well. So that's kind of going into the resources there. There's areas to kind of go into where they can definitely kind of build and improve in other areas, but or make or create more financial flexibility to be able to improve the team. But so that's what we have there. So I'm going to go into the team needs here. Kind of go back to where I was starting there a little bit ago. So you look at the offensive line, and again, you have Laken Tomlinson still in a contract. Joe Tittman had a really good rookie year. I expect him to be our starting center in 2024, and hopefully many years after that. And then AVT is kind of a wild card here. So in a press conference yesterday, Robert Saleh made it a point to call out that he would like in 2024 for Elijah Vera Tucker to play in one key position. Didn't go out of his way to say what position that would be, but when you look at Elijah Vera Tucker's role, I think a lot of us know at guard he would be an All-Pro. But we saw him play right tackle and we saw him play left tackle, and in both those positions, he was still well above average. He was very good in both those spots. So it really comes down to how they kind of progress that situation. Um, I'm not high on Laken Tomlinson as many of us are, kind of in that same boat. He's a player that Jets gave a big contract to a couple years ago, because he was coming off an all pro season. Um, and my biggest thing on free agents, and it's kind of a hard thing, not many great players walk into free agency. There's a lot of circumstances that happen around those situations that make it happen. It's very rare that great players hit free agency. You look at a couple years ago when the Saints were in a salary cap bind. Teron Armstead and safety, forgetting his Marcus Williams, were both in free agency. In any other situation, players of those of their caliber typically don't hit the open market, especially a guy like Armstead who plays a premium position. Um, those guys just don't become available. But because of the salary cap situation, those players became available. Um, you look at a situation like the Jets with Bryce Huff. He's a guy coming off a 10 sack season. Um, Pass rushers are a premium. I don't think it would be by any way a smart decision to just let this guy walk out. But there's needs in a variety of different areas. Edge rusher is a position I feel like the Jets might have a little more confidence in, to where they feel comfortable letting a guy like Bryce Huff walk away. I think it'd be a huge mistake, but um, that's a circumstance when you have a team that has, an influx of talent at one position. A great player could walk out. When you look at a team like the 49ers, you know, starting offensive linemen are a rare commodity in this league. There's teams littered around the NFL that have bad offensive lines. So for an offensive line just be able to walk out, or offensive lineman just be able to walk out, it's a little bit questionable. There's franchise tags, there's many means to keep a player in the building, and that didn't happen. And it's become apparent based on his play over the last couple of seasons, but since joining the team, that maybe his success has something to do with the guy standing to his left in those years in San Francisco than the player sitting in his spot. Um, with that being said, his contract makes it very difficult for the team to move on. I believe there is some work that can be done as far as a post June 1 designation. Again, I will talk through all this in a later video. But as I stand right now, we have three offensive linemen on the roster that are going to be starters next year. It's Tomlinson, it's Tittman, probably playing their roles that they've played this season, left guard and center. And then Elijah Tucker again is the wild card. Is he gonna play right guard? Is he gonna play right tackle? My thought is that you can find a good right guard in the draft in the middle rounds and start him right away. You're not gonna be able to find a good right tackle and have him play as a starting right tackle in the fourth or fifth rounds. Because of the need and tackles on both sides of the ball is kind of why I'm looking into that later round kind of window, because I fully expect that first round pick is going to be an offensive lineman or a playmaker. If the Jets are able to address two offensive line spots in the first in free agency, again, you have that issue of why is that guy even becoming a free agent? Why wasn't he tagged? So on and so forth. So if they're able to address both those spots in free agency or via trade before the draft, I look at a guy like David Bakhtiari, friends with Aaron Rodgers, familiarity with Nate Hackett's system and can come in and play at a better level than we've seen out of many on this offensive line. The question mark on him is some of the injuries over the past couple of years. But there's definitely different avenues for improvement there. So again, you look at this offensive line, definitely need 2 new starters, and I would like a third guy to come in and potentially compete with Laken Tomlinson, whether that's somebody you're gonna bring in through, free agency or in the middle rounds of the draft, someone that you think could potentially develop to push him. Because I mean, I think 2024 would be his last season with the team, so definitely wanna have something, filled in there for potentially, what to expect in the future. Um, so yeah, definitely need to fill in offensive line with 2 starters, and if the third one's needed to push Lincoln Tomlinson, that's where that goes. And then I mentioned earlier, sticking with the offensive side of the ball, a playmaker, a weapon. Now, when you look at this, the easy kind of thought is, okay, we need a new wide receiver. But I've kind of fallen into a little bit of intrigue with it was on the, NFL Stock Exchange or whatever it is. It's the, show with Connor Rogers and, Tampa Bay Trey. They talk about, the draft basically weekly. It's awesome show. If you're into the draft and into the buildup of the draft, these guys do a fantastic job. Definitely suggest giving them a look. But what kinda caught me, like, a little bit that I really didn't put too much thought into was potentially the Jets bringing in a guy like, Brock Bowers, because he's basically an offensive lineman that could play wide receiver is really the best way of kind of identifying him. He's outstanding. He's with the ball in his hands. He makes guys miss downfield. You look at a guy like Dalton Kincaid, what he did with the Bills this year. But Bowers also does a fantastic job in the blocking game. So when you look at what your team needs, you know, offensive line is a major need. But if you have a guy like Bowers who's good at pass blocking and also good at run blocking, it only increases like what if you don't hit in the offensive line free agency or you don't have a great offensive line fall to you and you think this guy's your best option, it would set some intrigue to go with a guy like Brock Bowers, who you know, would be a weapon. You wouldn't be the offensive guy, you wouldn't be the guy on the outside, that would stretch the field down there, but you have Garrett Wilson to do that already. You have Alan Lazard, who you would only hope can progress and get back to what what we had saw him in Green Bay. Was he ever a 1,000-yard receiver? No. To expect him to be that here was absolutely, not idiotic. It was hopeful. Um, I wasn't expecting that out of him. I was really hoping that Corey Davis and him with a little bit of Randall Cobb would kind of all combine to be a 12 to 1,300 yard receiver, while Garrett Wilson took the bulk of, you know, 13 to 1,400 yards. That was kind of what I was hoping going into the season. Obviously, didn't happen. Rodgers went down, everything else. But so, you look at weapon. Brock Bowers is a very intriguing option. If he's even there at 10, I don't think he will be. I think that there's a lot of momentum towards him being a top 10 pick, being like earlier in the top 10. Um, but maybe there's some recency concerns with how other teams have handled tight ends. You look at Kyle Pitts coming out of the draft a couple years ago. There was just all the hype around him, all the buildup around him, and just never made it there. A lot of tight ends come out in the first round, and not many are able to excel or exceed expectations. You look at guys like Noah Fant was the one that coming out of his draft. He was a lot of hype around him. Didn't make it out there. But then you have guys coming in the second, third rounds that do fantastic jobs. So kind of reminds me of like the running back position a little bit. Do we want to pick a tight end in the first round? When we get some guy in the second and third rounds, we develop him, and then he turns into a great player. Isaiah Likely is another guy you look at. He's progressed very well with Baltimore. Um, so maybe he does slip out, and I think if he's there at 10, it's going to be very difficult for the Jets to pass up on him. But I do still, with that being said, expect it to be an offensive lineman in that spot. So when you look at weapons, look, it's going to probably come in free agency, whether it's a guy like um, Mike Evans, if he's available. I know he has free agency that he's going to be available for. So definitely a guy that, especially, he's got his ring already, caught passes from Brady, maybe wants to win another ring with another Hall of Fame quarterback. I'd be all for that. There's a lot of smoke in the air for a potential Devontae Adams reunion with Aaron Rodgers. Um, basically, the if the guy who worked with Aaron Rodgers or handed him a cup of coffee or any sort of situation, it's going to be linked to the Jets. Devontae Adams would be a fantastic ad, but it would come with some risk. You'd have to trade for him. One, um, big contract on there. Two, and obviously he's 32 years old, I believe now. Still a fantastic player. I'm not taking that away from him, but the older receivers get, the more they start to hit a little bit of a decline. Is he there yet? I don't think so. He had a pretty good season this year with below average play at the quarterback position. Aiden O'Connell came in and played well down the stretch, but still nowhere near the play he would get with a guy like Aaron Rodgers throwing the ball if he were to come in. So just really the key here is you have a star in Garrett Wilson. You just need somebody else who knows how to get open. And that's been a major issue all season long. That's where the Jets really need to kind of take a notice and the look and get an upgrade there. Kind of try and move through the rest of these pretty quickly here. Not much time, um, but um, sticking with the offense, this team needs a legitimate backup quarterback. The Zach Wilson experiment, if you want to call it that, you don't really experiment with a second overall pick, but that's what it has become. It has just not worked. However many different ways the Jets have tried to do it, it hasn't worked. Maybe the sitting behind Aaron Rodgers thing for a year or two could have turned into something. Um, but even that was going to be asking a lot. Um, Zach Wilson was lost both mentally, he was confused. There was nothing that we saw after his first 2 years that made us think that he could rebound into something great, something better than that. It was going to be a huge ask for Aaron Rodgers to tutor this guy and get him to develop into anything that would potentially be worth giving him a second contract, because that's what you would have been asking after 2 years, and then 2 years staying behind Rodgers was the initial kind of thought. He would have been off his first 4 years. Are the Jets going to give him the fifth year option like the Packers did with Jordan Love? Um, maybe, but that would kind of not make the greatest amount of sense, in my opinion. You would have to sign him to a contract, re-sign him to whatever. It would probably just be like a year to year type of thing after that. Um, it just didn't make much sense to me ever. The Jets needed to do this at the beginning of the last offseason, and if they didn't, it needed to be done after Rodgers got injured. There's been plenty of podcasts talked about that, plenty of articles written about it, plenty of literature if you want to go read on the wrongdoings of this front office from a backup quarterback standpoint. Um, but that's not here nor there. Here we are in 2024. Aaron Rodgers coming off major injuries. The team needs to bring in a legitimate option as a backup quarterback. And I don't really care what it takes. I know our resources are limited. I mentioned it earlier today, but we cannot go into another season where, if Aaron Rodgers gets injured, that the season's a wash. Because if that's the case, everyone's gone. So backup quarterback needs to come in. And then kind of go with defense a little bit here. Something that not many have kind of identified as major needs. Obviously, the Jets are always going to go into any offseason with um, trying to bring in defensive linemen. And you look at what they did last year. Quentin Jefferson, Al Woods, both coming on 1 year contracts. They're both walking, along with Solomon Thomas is also a free agent. Um, I would expect Solomon Thomas to be signed similar to what he did this year, just a short contract. Bring him back. Maybe even the same with just Quentin Jefferson and Al Woods. Just maybe they just recycle and bring the whole group back together again. Or if there are other D tackles, but I would expect the Jets to bring in a few defensive tackles and an edge rusher. Doesn't make sense to bring in an edge rusher when you got a great one standing in your own building, just don't let him walk out. Uh, tie him to his locker and have him sign the contract. Obviously, that's not going to happen, but uh, that's the answer there. Additionally, you look at the safety position. Um, Going into free agency is going to be Jordan Whitehead, who is one of our primary safeties, Ashton Davis, who is another one of our primary safeties, and then Chuck Clark, who going into the season was supposed to be one of our primary safeties, got injured in training camp, basically a week or two before the season started, I believe it was. Never got to see what he could be in a Jets uniform, but he was a great player in Baltimore. It would be nice if the Jets can bring some of these guys back, especially a guy like Ashton Davis, who, let's be honest, I personally wasn't a huge fan of him after seeing what limited role he had in his first couple of seasons, but he's progressed into a pretty solid player. I actually like what I've seen out of him um, outside that fumble after the interception to New England. But regardless, the guy's out there. He makes plays. You know when he's out there. Is he a guy like Quincy Williams? No, but he's a good guy out there as a role player. So the Jets are going to have to bring in two safeties, maybe even three, to fill in all these players. And then I mentioned earlier the needs on special teams, punter and kicker, and I mentioned Justin Hardy as well. So all these positions need to be addressed. And you're talking about doing this with two premium draft picks and 5 million in cap space before you make moves to generate more cap relief. So that's kind of where we stand right now. Um, if you haven't already, please take some time to leave a message in my comments. I'll be happy to reply to any and all those comments. And it's going to be a long off season. It's going to be hopefully a lot more players turn around and sign with us now that we have Rodgers secured under contract and giving us that 2 year kind of you know commitment. Maybe players that are kind of being let go in free agency or become available see this as an opportunity and maybe earn a second contract down the road if they can just kind of take a couple steps forward. But end all be all, this is no short of an all in season. These next 2 seasons really are nothing short of all in. We can't go into a season like we did last year where uh, Orlando Brown was available in free agency, and apparently the Jets had interest, and it didn't get finalized. He ended up signing elsewhere. It, Fletcher Cox, similar situation. He was almost a Jet. The list of players that are almost Jets, it's kind of astronomical. It would be an all-pro team. Um, and I feel like the Jets keep striking out on these players. Um, it could come from Joe Douglas's, you know, mentality of drawing a line in the sand, which you do need to do as a GM. I'm not saying, you know, always be the highest bidder, but sometimes, like in a situation like this, you do need to finalize to bring these guys in. Do whatever it takes to kind of get that signature on the line and finish up what needs to be done. If money needs to be moved in out years, that's always an option. Unfortunately, when you do that, it does hinder what you could do in future years. As we're seeing now, a lot of restructures have players with high cap numbers in this current year, and doesn't give us that much flexibility. But we do have avenues to create more cap room, as I said, which again I will talk about in a future pod. And to get notifications of that future pod, please take your time, like and subscribe to my channel. Would really appreciate it. It helps me grow. And all in all, it's been a terrible season, but all we have to is look forward. We won that last game of the year. We have the 10th pick. We have some cap space. We can make more, and this team will be better next year. It can only get better than the way it was this year because we have Aaron Rodgers, and we're going to improve this team in this offseason with the intentions that this team has a short window, and let's take advantage of that. It's up to Joe Douglas. It's up to Robert Saleh. Let's get it done, and let's go Jets.